We are on page 4, chapter 1, lesson 2, and it's relationships between sets of rational numbers. I hope you've seen this Venn diagram before where the whole numbers are in the middle and then the integers and then the rational numbers. There's one more set that we're going to draw just a little circle in the middle, and that is supposed to be an N for natural numbers. And natural numbers are the counting numbers, counting from 1 to infinity. Outside natural numbers is whole numbers, which are all the natural numbers, so all of our counting numbers, and 0. So the only difference between natural numbers and whole numbers is that whole numbers include the number 0. And then outside whole numbers is integers. And integers are all the whole numbers and their opposites. And then the big circle is rational numbers. Rational numbers are any numbers that can be written as a fraction, which is just about everything. Because if I had something like 5 and I wanted to change it to a fraction, I could just put a 1 under it, and there he is, a fraction. So rational numbers can be expressed as a ratio. And a ratio is some number to some other number. And remember, the denominator can never be 0. So if we're going to compare rational numbers, we use a least common denominator. And we find a least common denominator by finding a least common multiple, or skip counting. But in the 7th grade, we really don't like to call it skip counting. So I take the 2 denominators, and I'm going to start with 18, because it's the big number. So after 18 would be 36. And then after 36 would be 54. I'm going to stop there because I don't think I need to go any bigger. And then I'm going to try counting by 12s until I come to one of those. And I know that I'm going to come to 36 because 12, then 24, then 36. So the first one they have in common is 36. The least common denominator is going to be 36. So I'm going to change them both to have a denominator of 36. So for 7/12, I would need to multiply the numerator and the denominator by 3. So that would make my new numerator 21. For 8/18, I'm going to need to multiply by 2. And 8 times 2 makes my new numerator 16. And 21 is bigger than 16. So 7/12 is greater than 8/18. We put the greater than sign between them. Sometimes we can use a number line to compare numbers. And we need to remember that negative numbers kind of look like they're counting backwards. So we go 0, -1, -2. -1 and 5/6 would mean that we go to -1 and then 5/6 more. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It would be right there, the first number. Negative 1 and 1/6 means we go to negative 1 and then go over 1/6. So the other number would be right there. Negative 1 and 1/6 and negative 1 and 5/6. And the littler numbers are on the left and the bigger numbers are always on the right. So negative 1 and 5/6 is smaller than, so negative 1 and 5/6 is less than negative 1 and 1/6. Now let's try when there's several numbers. When there's several numbers to compare, we need them to be all in the same format. And usually decimals are the easiest way to compare, so change them all to decimals. 67%, we need to move the decimal 2 spaces to the left. So that would be decimal 67. And the next one is already in decimal format. And then 3/4 would be 0.75, which is on that sheet you're supposed to be memorizing. And negative 50% would be negative 0.50. And if any of them had a lesser amount of digits, we would want them to all have the same amount of digits so we can compare. So the least ones are going to be negative. So think of which ones are going to be to the farthest left. That one or that one? Remember, negatives kind of count backwards. So the -6, negative 0.64, is going to be less. So that one goes first. And then the next one would be the other negative. I do want to write it in what it was originally. Originally it was 50%, so write it as 50%. So I've used those two, and now I'm just comparing the two positive numbers. And the smaller is going to be the 0.67, which was 67%. And then the next one is the 0.75, which was originally 3/4. Let's do some examples now. For Chapter 1, Lesson 2, Guided Practice. Number 1 says, label each number with all the possible sets it belongs to. So 0.6, the smallest thing it would be able to, the smallest set it would need to fit into would be rational. Rational. It's not an integer because it's not a whole or an opposite. Then 5,600, that is a whole number. And if it's a whole number, it's also an integer. And if it's an integer, it's also a rational. -25, that would be an integer. And if it's an integer, it's also a rational. And the next one is -3.05, which is a little bit tricky because students want to say it's an integer, but it's not an integer because it has the decimal. Integers cannot have decimals or fractions. So if it can't be an integer, it's a rational. Number 2. Because he sees movies at his local theater so often, Del Mar is being offered a discount. He can have either 1/3 off his next ticket or 3/10 off his next ticket. Which discount should Del Mar choose? So we are comparing 1/3 and 3/10. It'd probably be easiest if we change them to decimals. And we know that 1/3 is 0.3 repeating and 3/10 is 0.3. So they kind of look equal, but what would be the next number on 1/3? 3, because it keeps repeating. But the next number on 3/10 would be 0. So 30 is less than 33. That means this one is the bigger discount. So Delmar would probably want to pick 1/3 as his discount. Number 3, Willie runs the 110-meter hurdles in 17 3/5 seconds, and Anir runs it in 17 6/11 seconds. Which runner is faster? So we are comparing those two mixed numbers. So first we want to look at the whole number part, and I notice the whole number part is the same, so I'm really just comparing the fraction part. And I think it might be a little bit difficult to have to divide out 6 and 11. So what if we just looked for a common denominator? Anybody see a common denominator? I think 55 will work. So to change 5 to 55, I multiply by 11. So if I do the same on top, I get 33. And for the other fraction, I need to multiply by 5, and I get 30. Now, is the faster going to be the big number or the little number? Faster is the little number, so that one is the faster, which means Anir is faster. Number 4, Cassie successfully harvested 7/12 of her crop, and Robert successfully harvested 29/50 of his crop. Which person successfully harvested the larger portion of her crop? So again, we might look for a common denominator, or you could divide it out. Whichever is easier for you. And I think for me, I'm going to look for a common denominator. And there's an easy common denominator. You just multiply the two denominators together. Anytime you multiply the two denominators together, you're going to get a common denominator. So 12 times 50 makes 600. Then I'd have to do the same thing on top. 7 times 50 makes 350. And then for the fraction down here, 50 times 12 is still 600. And then 29 times 12 348. So the larger portion was the 7/12. Which person? So that was Cassie. Mylene has enough room in her truck to move 3.385 tons of gravel. Her father has asked her to move 3 5/16 tons. Will Mylene be able to move all the gravel in only one trip? So we want to see if this number is bigger than what Dad's asking her to do. So we need to change 5/16 to a decimal so we can compare. So I think the easiest thing to do would be to divide that one out. So 16 goes into 50 3 times, and 3 times 16 is 48. 16 goes into 20 once. Another 0. You know what? I really could stop right there because the whole number for the first one is 3, and then the decimal is 3, 8, 5. And so far, we have 3, because the whole number is 3, decimal 3, 1. Those are different. I can already tell. So is the amount her dad asked her to move smaller than her truck? Yes. So it will fit. She can help.